What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, December 6th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 7-game NBA slate tonight on both DraftKings and FanDuel. So really nice size slate. We do have a couple of late games, so late swap may end up coming into play, although not too much injury news that we're waiting on in those games. We do have Andrew Wiggins questionable for Golden State. I think, if I remember correctly, that's the only Q tag we really have to worry about. It's possible I'm forgetting somebody, and if I am, I'm sure I'll be corrected and or just mention it when I get to that game. But not a ton of injury news in those late couple games, I don't think. We are waiting on some news in the early games, but overall, knock on wood, seems like a pretty calm day injury-wise. Still have, a couple hours for that to get screwed up, but also seems like a pretty fun slate as far as games that are likely to be competitive. Obviously, we've seen tons of blowouts lately, and games having close spreads doesn't mean that they're not going to blow out, but no game on this slate has a double-digit spread, I don't believe. So as likely as you're going to get for games to be competitive. Steven asked if LeBron's still questionable. Yes, he is. Huge news, but that is a 7:30 game, so hopefully we have it before lock. There is one game starting at 7. We need to know a Sixers starting lineup. Andre Drummond is also questionable. So that's two big pieces of news, whether or not he plays and whether or not he starts. That will impact things. Obviously, I'll touch on that one in the first game. But for this show, I did project Drummond in and starting. I haven't looked at my personal exposures yet, but that does potentially change things. Jonathan Isaac questionable now for Orlando. You have LeBron questionable. Reeves already ruled out. So there is some injury news on the slate, and obviously we'll touch on that. I have the exposures up that I would have if the slate started right now. As a reminder, that's not super important because, for one, things are going to change between now and lock as far as probably injury news and probably ownership projections. So that's not super important. It's more just kind of another thing that I can mention or talk about as far as approaching the slate. But going to go through game by game and just break everything down. We can see where I would be if the slate started right now. And starting with Orlando taking on Philadelphia. I mentioned it a second ago, but Jonathan Isaac was downgraded to questionable a few minutes before this show started, which makes me think he probably doesn't play. I did have him projected in, but it does matter for a couple of reasons. Jonathan Isaac hasn't been playing huge minutes lately as Orlando has gotten healthier. They got Wendell Carter Jr. back. Jonathan Isaac's minutes have been cut in recent games, but one big takeaway from Orlando's most recent game, which was also against this Philadelphia team, is that they condensed their rotation. Cole Anthony typically has been playing like 4 or 5 minutes a game. He didn't play at all. And then the other big one was Jet Howard, who typically has been playing like 8 to 12 minutes, didn't play at all either. So you got a true 9-man rotation from Orlando in that game, including like 14 or 15 minutes for Jonathan Isaac. Now, I don't know if they'll continue going with that nine-man rotation or if they'll go back to, throwing 8 minutes to Howard and 4 to Anthony, but it did make me a little bit more aggressive with my Orlando minutes projections here. I projected Anthony not to play, and then I projected a handful of minutes for Howard. But the impact of that shorter rotation is that it makes it easier to get those like 37-minute games that we're seeing from Jalen Suggs when he's not in foul trouble and in competitive games. It makes it easier to get, big minutes for Wagner, big minutes for Wendell Carter, who played a season high, or at least since his return, 31.7 in that game. But if Jonathan Isaac is out, then you kind of don't even have to worry about, do they add a body back into the rotation, because you're already subtracting the 14 to 16 minutes that Isaac was playing. Those can go to Howard. They can go, a few minutes to Anthony, and it doesn't matter. It's just going to make it a little bit easier to feel confident in the minutes that you're projecting to Orlando. Now, all of that being said, you don't really have great pricing on this team. If you look at the ownership projections here, Jalen Suggs projected for the most ownership on DraftKings at 8%. Franz Wagner getting 7% at 9,500. Carter's getting 6% at 5,100. I'm getting to a little bit of Wendell Carter Jr. right now. I'm getting to a little bit of Jalen Suggs. I do think that they're both pretty solid plays. I like that Carter has power forward eligibility and that he's relatively inexpensive. The low ownership is nice. There are a lot of pretty good plays that you're going to get in this price range and at the forward positions today, which I think is keeping the ownership down here. But the center rotation that you're getting basically is a two-man rotation, more or less, between Goga and Mo Wagner at the 5, and then you're getting Wendell Carter Jr. playing the bulk of his minutes alongside them. He did play a few minutes without either of them on the floor last game, but I expect that you're going to get like 70 to 74 minutes combined from those two, or from those three, rather. Goga only played like 22 minutes last game, but you're going to get some games where he plays 28 or 30. Mo Wagner played more minutes last game than Goga did. You're going to get some games where he plays less. I projected it, as you can see on the screen, 29 to Carter, 20 to Wagner, and 25 to Goga. That didn't get me to any Goga. It didn't get me to any Wagner. It did get me to a little bit of Carter. But you do, again, you just have the potential for 32 minutes from Carter. You could get 30 in any given game from Batadze. You could get 28 in any given game from Wagner. You're just going to see really volatile minutes between those three, I think. And so it's going to make it difficult to prioritize any of them. But there is volatility, which is nice in tournaments if you are considering one of those guys. But overall, Orlando right now looking like a secondary team to me. I'm only really getting to some Jalen Suggs or Wendell Carter Jr. Not to say that there's anything wrong with Franz Wagner other than that. He is really, really expensive. On the other side for Philadelphia, I mentioned we do have a Q tag here on Andre Drummond. They had initially said that he was going to be out through this, beyond this game, but now he is listed as questionable. And then if he does play, then the question becomes, is he starting or is he coming off the bench? If he's coming off the bench, I really just don't care. Because, I'm not interested. He's 5,300. I would expect that he's somewhat limited if he's coming off the bench. Adam Bona is out. So you would, like, if Drummond is out and Bona is out, then you have the potential for Yabusele to play a ton of minutes. And you're probably going to have like KJ Martin getting backup center minutes, Caleb Martin getting backup center minutes, just small lineups there, or they call somebody up from the G League. Like, they don't really have another center. So if Drummond's out, that's a big plus for Yabusele's minutes. We saw a lot from him last game. I mentioned in that one that I was a little bit higher on his playing time than industry projections were. I wasn't 37 or 38 minutes, which is what he ended up, 37 minutes, what he ended up playing. But I do think that if Drummond is out particularly, you're going to get a lot of minutes from him again here. If Drummond is in and coming off the bench, I think you're probably getting like a 32-minute to 16-minute split. If Drummond starts, I think it signals you're probably getting, 25 minutes or so from Drummond, which would make him start to look pretty decent at 5,300. Although, as you can see here, I still didn't get to him even, with that projection, which is kind of weird to me. I'm thinking maybe it has something to do with the way he's being projected by SaberSim right now on the back end, but whatever. That's something that'll get cleared up by lock. If he does start, I am interested in him at 5,300, even though he's not showing up right now. Paul George, the only guy from this team I actually am getting to, and this team's not projected for any ownership, but I do really like Paul George here. I had said on the show the last time he played that I thought there was some sneaky minutes upside for him. I had projected, I think, 32. Most of the industry was at like 30. But if you looked at his rotation from the game before, it didn't seem like the Sixers were being that cautious with him. He had picked up a little bit of foul trouble in the first half. But if he hadn't picked up that foul trouble, it looked like he was going to play like 17 minutes in that first half. Then last game, he goes out there and plays 37 minutes. I projected him for 35 minutes here. I don't really know why. Like, he just played 37. It's Paul George. He's apparently healthy for the time being. I don't really know why he'd be projected lower. Like 35, 36, 37 minutes, I think are all very reasonable here in a game with a tight spread. You still don't have Joel Embiid. George is only $7,600. So I'm getting like double the field right now, which I do really like at this price. I think he looks very good. The rest of this team is tough. Maxey should play a lot of minutes. If you get to him at low ownership, then fine. It's, Tyrese Maxey playing a lot of minutes. Orlando does have a good defense, as Anthony just mentioned in chat. You have multiple good on-ball defenders with Jalen Suggs and KCP out there that can make life difficult. So if you are going to Maxey, it's not a matchup thing. It's just nobody is playing him and he's going to play a bunch of minutes. But, as you can see, no ownership, and with a 37-minute projection, still not getting to him. Paul George, the only thing that I'm getting to right now, and again, I would be interested in Drummond if he's starting, and I'll be interested in Yabusele if Drummond is out. He is still expensive at 6K, but he does have power forward eligibility, and I do think if Drummond is out, you're just getting a lot of minutes here. Lakers taking on the Hawks in Atlanta. Q-tag on LeBron James, which is obviously massive. If he's out, it opens up playmaking, it opens up usage, it opens up minutes. It just is going to make this whole team look better. There is also some chance, I would think, that we get a different starting lineup than we have been, just given that the Lakers have gotten torched in their last couple of games. Would not shock me if James is in, if D'Angelo Russell moves to the bench, LeBron's the point guard, they put like Cam Reddish back in the starting lineup for defense like they were doing previously. Maybe Max Christie moves into the starting lineup. They go back to Gabe Vincent. I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked to see Russell get benched here. But assuming he starts, he's going to look really, really good. $5,400 price tag is higher than last time out, but still not high enough for what we've seen from him as a starter. Keep in mind, the 2 games that he has started without Reeves recently, 34 minutes and 32 minutes, the Lakers lost both of those games by a massive margin. Russell came nowhere close to playing. Nobody came anywhere close to playing down the stretch. So with the rotations we've seen in those couple of games, if the game's competitive, you're probably getting like 36 to 38 minutes from Russell. So keep that in mind. Also, not that it should matter in this one. It's like a 5-point spread, but their last loss was a 3-point spread. Russell has also, along with LeBron, been playing at the start of the second and fourth quarters, which is something that just makes guys a little bit less blowout proof from a playing time standpoint, because they don't have to wait and come back in 6 minutes into the fourth quarter if it's still competitive. When they start the fourth quarter, it does give you usually a few more extra minutes that they wouldn't necessarily get if their rotation were different. So if Russell's in the starting lineup, he looks very good. 54% projected ownership. I'm getting to 58%. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if we see the Lakers shake up their lineup a little bit. There's a lot of stuff going on with that team right now, and we already know that JJ Redick is not the biggest D'Angelo Russell fan in the world. LeBron getting to 32%. 29% projected ownership at 9,600. It's a good matchup. He obviously is going to need to do a lot if this team's going to play well. He hasn't been playing great lately, particularly on the defensive end. Did have a good fantasy game last time out on a per minute basis. But yeah, it's just a good price. He looks good. I will say that, if you have a lineup that has a lot of popular players and you need a tournament pivot, this is a spot where, for example, Franz Wagner at a quarter of the ownership is a perfectly reasonable place to look. Not that I was getting to him, but just a perfect like 1v1 if you need to save some ownership. But LeBron does project very well for the salary, assuming that he's good to go. Dalton Connect, 28% projected ownership. I'm only getting the 6%. I think this has to do with the Spurs. I haven't looked entirely at my exposures right now, but I do know I'm getting a ton of, I think, that game in general, or the Spurs and then like the Bulls. But the Spurs have a lot of guys in this price range that are projected for less ownership right now. And so I'm getting a lot of them. So I do think if Spurs ownership projections come up and maybe these Lakers ones come down, I start to get more of like Dalton Connect, but should play 30 to 32 minutes here at 4,700. Does have shooting guard, small forward eligibility. Perfect example of someone, why I said at the top of the show that to keep in mind that the exposures here don't really matter all that much. You can make a lot of good lineups, I'm sure, that have Dalton Connect. He's a perfectly fine value play. I've mentioned it before too, but one of the nice things about him is if he's shooting well, there's a bunch of minutes available for him to play on top of that 30-minute projection. If he's not shooting well, then those teams probably don't matter anyway because he's not scoring fantasy points. But if you get the game where he goes out there and just knocks down 6 threes, the Lakers aren't going to be like, JJ Redick isn't going to be running to the scorer's table trying to get Max Christie in there in place of Dalton Connect, or trying to get Cam Reddish in there in place of Dalton Connect. Like if he's knocking down his shots, suddenly you're looking at 34, 35, 36 minutes probably. So he does kind of have the ability to just like create his own destiny as well from a playing time standpoint, which is nice. Anthony Davis, center only on DraftKings. He does have power forward eligibility on FanDuel. I haven't run any lineups for FanDuel, but just pointing that out because it is going to make him a better play there than he is on DraftKings. But he's a good play on DraftKings too. Projected for 23% ownership. One of the highest projected guys on the slate. I think I have him with the second highest projection right now. Happy to get to him where I can. Right now, I'm a little bit below the field. Rui, right around the field on him at 4,900. He's somebody I thought his minutes were interesting too when I dug into the Lakers rotation, because if you just go back and look at recent games that the Lakers have played, I don't think it tells the full story for Rui's likely playing time. He played 26 minutes last game. He played 29 the game before that. He played 40 on December 1st. He played 30 on the 29th. He played 26 on the 27th. Keep in mind that Rui was having his minutes somewhat limited coming back from injury. So those games like 4 and 5 games ago aren't really anything that we should be looking at. Then he plays 40 minutes against Utah on the 1st. And then you get 2 games where the Lakers lose by like 30 or 40 points. And so you only get 26 to 30 minutes. He still played like 17 minutes in the first half last game. If this game's competitive, I think you're getting, like if it goes down to the wire, I think you're getting 34 minutes from Rui, if not more. So at 4,900, I think he makes a lot of sense. And also his positions aren't as favorable as Connect since he doesn't have guard eligibility. But I really don't think that Dalton Connect should be 3 times as popular as Rui. So I'll point that one out just as, two similarly priced teammates where, you can see here, I have Rui projected like a half point higher. The positions make Connect look a little bit better, but other than that, I think they're very, very similar, and the ownership, at least right now, does not look that way. So that would be something to keep an eye on. On the Atlanta side, or on the other side, the Hawks at home, slight 4 to 5 point favorites here. DeAndre Hunter, 5K, projected for 14% ownership. This is another one where I think DeAndre Hunter is a perfectly fine play. You're probably getting around 28 minutes from him. He has typically been in the Hawks closing lineups lately, which is nice. I just know that we have some Spurs guys that are getting similar ownership that I like a little bit more. And so that is sort of what is impacting my exposure to Hunter right now. There's a very good chance that by lock, all of the stuff has balanced out and gotten closer to where I think it should be, because generally the field plays pretty efficiently. I like to think that I'm good at DFS. I like to think that I'm better at projecting minutes than most people or most sites are. I don't think that I'm like that much better to where, this isn't like 2016 where I can just sit down and say, oh, I'm looking at something completely different than everybody else. And I'm going to be right and they're wrong. So usually they end up pretty close to what I'm doing. So I think that you'll probably see my DeAndre Hunter come up and the Spurs come down a little bit. But the way things are projected right now, I would just be sacrificing some DeAndre Hunter for some more of guys in later games. But still at 5K, he's going to look fine. Jalen Johnson, 9% ownership. I got the 3%. Fair price tag, I think, at 8,500. And obviously, good matchup here against a Lakers team that just has not been able to defend anybody lately. I talked last show on being a little bit nervous about Jalen Johnson's rotations because the previous game, he'd only played like 16 or so first half minutes. He'd only played like 32 minutes total. He went back and played 40 minutes yesterday. So you're probably just going to see a little bit more volatility in his playing time now than you were getting when this team had injuries. Now that you have Bogdanovic back, you have Hunter back, you're probably going to see a little bit more volatility, but should still on average be giving you probably 36 minutes or so. So there is plenty of upside there. Onyeka Okongwu and Clint Capella splitting 48 minutes. I projected 24 apiece. Realistically, it ranges anywhere from like 20 to 28 minutes for either of them. So the volatility does give them some upside, but they are both center only, which sucks. Both getting about 9% ownership. I would assume that by lock, I'm getting a little bit more of them than I have right now. I think, again, it just has to do with like the salary range and the fact that I like a lot of guys in this range at their current projected ownership. But either one of these guys is fine. I wouldn't play them together on this slate. 4,700 Bogdanovic should give you 25, 26 minutes. He cracked the closing lineup last game. Still only got to like 26 minutes, but we have seen him get as high as 28 since returning from injury. So just a lot of like 5 to 10% owned guys, or I guess basically around 10% owned guys on this team. Really good matchup against the Lakers. I don't have much of it right now, but wouldn't be upset if I got a bit more. Didn't mention Trae Young, but he's getting 7% ownership at 9,100. It's Trae Young. You know what you're getting from him. Good matchup and all of that. Dyson Daniels still playing big minutes. He's up to 6,300 though. Risa Shea, 3,900. Typically going to give you 20 to 21 minutes. Did play 24 a couple games ago, but nothing that I love from the Hawks. Nothing that I really dislike from the Hawks. Just a bunch of guys that are decent, relatively low-owned pieces. Milwaukee taking on Boston, and I am curious to see what I am getting to of Dame. I'm not getting to any, which I kind of thought I'd get to some, but I'm not getting to any Milwaukee here. As you can see, the prices are not particularly appealing. The matchup against Boston in general is not particularly appealing. No ownership coming into any of these guys. The one thing I will point out here is that I have it in the model I have for play type data, looking at, what defenses struggle to defend, what players do most frequently, etc. Dame does actually have the highest grade in that for me of anybody today. And it's weird because he is, playing Boston, but Boston has actually allowed the 8th most points per possession to pick and roll ball handlers this year. And they've allowed the 4th most total possessions per game to pick and roll ball handlers this year. 45% of Dame's possessions have been in the pick and roll. He ranks in the 87th percentile in efficiency. So one of the best, pick and roll ball handlers in the NBA, always has been. One of the highest frequency pick and roll ball handlers in the NBA, always has been. Taking on a Boston team that is allowing a lot of pick and roll possessions and not defending it well. As you can see, all of that still did not get him into lineups for me, but it is something that I wanted to point out because one, it's interesting. One, just the matchup itself, and two, that Boston has struggled to defend the pick and roll this year. And then, he is getting no ownership. He is somebody where he's in that like LeBron price range where he's certainly not a 26-1 dog against, to beat LeBron. But all that being said, I'm not getting him, at least right now. He does typically have a more favorable price on FanDuel. I haven't actually looked to see what it is, but maybe I'll get to him over there. On the Boston side, no Kristaps Porzingis, should move Al Horford into the starting lineup. So I'm assuming that we will get a starting lineup of Jrue Holiday, who should be back, Derek White, Jason Tatum, who should be back or is listed available, and Jaylen Brown and Al Horford, trying to do too many things at once right now. But you should get the normal starting lineup except Horford in place of Porzingis. So the only guys I'm getting to on this team are the starters. Very not happy to see that I'm once again getting a ton of Jrue Holiday, but I don't really know what else to do at this point. He hasn't been a very good point per minute guy, but it's not like he's completely fallen off the face of the earth or anything like that. He's producing 0.81 DraftKings points per minute so far this year. You would like him to be better, but that's still decent production. He's only $5,100. And I think the big thing that is, one, driving him into my lineups, and two, which it goes hand in hand, keeping his ownership in check, is that his playing time is kind of misleading because he's at times this year just kind of been limited, where the Celtics were, by design, pretty clearly playing him like 28, 29 minutes. Also, the Celtics have been in a ton of blowouts this year, so that's just going to kind of naturally lower your average playing time for the season. But Drew's at 31.3 minutes per game overall this year, 32.1 in his last 10, 33 in his last 5, 34 and 36 in his last 2. This game has, a 7.5 point spread, which is about as close a spread as you're going to get for the Celtics. Still plenty of blowout risk here because they're really good and the Bucks have Doc Rivers as a coach. But I'm still going to go to Jrue as a value play here if he's really going to be like 12% owned. This is one of the $5K or, $5K to $5,500 guys that I'm getting a lot of that is just going to cost me some of that, Clint Capella in that range, Dalton Connect in that range, even though they're at different positions. If you're just going to get Jrue Holiday projected for similar or less ownership than those guys, and I'm projecting him to play like 34 minutes here, I'm going to get more than the field is. So he's standing out to me, which he's burned me like every slate, but going to keep going back to that. Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, all just, secondary options. If they land in some lineups, I think that's fine. Nothing that really stands out for any of them, though. Jrue at that price is the one that really stands out for me here. Indiana taking on the Bulls. Andrew Nembhard is questionable. I projected him in for now, gave him like 22 minutes. We haven't seen a lot of playing time from him yet in his return. TJ McConnell getting 31% ownership at 4,700. I don't love that ownership coming off the bench, but at the same time, McConnell is a good point per minute guy. The minutes should be there, even if Nembhard is back, assuming that he's going to be somewhat limited. We've seen McConnell playing plenty of minutes lately over his last handful of games. He's played 28 last game, 24 the game before that, 22, 24, 15 minutes 5 games ago. In the games with Nembhard, where Nembhard's played 15 and 19 minutes, McConnell's played 22 and 24. I projected him for 22 minutes, and he still showed up 22% of the time. So this is one of those spots where, it feels gross playing a 31% owned guy off the bench when he could, in any given game, play like 17 minutes. But 22 minutes is not a super aggressive projection by any stretch. So getting to him still is perfectly fine for me. Tyrese Halliburton showing up 33% of the time at 26% ownership, $8,300 price tag. His minutes have been up lately. This game is on the road, which I know I've mentioned before. He has shot much more poorly on the road this season than at home, but I don't really have a good way to quantify that, so I don't. The playing time, though, is, I think, really appealing lately. 37, 40, 37 minutes over his last 3, 34 games ago, and then 39 the game before that. So you have seen the playing time trend up. Projected him for 36 minutes in a game that has about as close to spread as you're going to find. Good matchup here against a Chicago team that doesn't play defense either. So I'm very happy to get to Halliburton at a cheap $8,300 price tag. Obi Toppin projected for 21% ownership. I'm only getting to 10. I've been over on him the last couple of games. I still think that he's a good value. I think it's probably just ownership that is kind of keeping me from getting to more. But Indiana's rotations, and I know I've talked about it previously, have been really appealing for Obi Toppin. Outside of foul trouble and blowouts, Moses Brown has not been in the Pacers rotation, which means that Obi Toppin is getting all of your backup center minutes in addition to some of the backup minutes at the 4. It just opens the door for him to play like low 20s to even as much as like 24 minutes in games, as opposed to before when you were giving Moses Brown the minutes behind Miles Turner. It basically makes it so Obi Toppin can only play 16 minutes, give or take. So Moses Brown not being in the rotation is good for Obi Toppin. It looks like the field has finally figured that out after a few games, but he's a good value. It just kind of matters, what the rest of your lineups look like. Miles Turner, I'm getting a lot of at 6,700. Moses Brown not being in the rotation is good for him as well. It has a bigger marginal impact on Obi Toppin since you're talking about going from 15, 16 minutes to 21, 22. But for Miles Turner, it does also mean going from like a 32-minute projection to 33 or 34. 20% projected ownership here in a good spot. I'm getting the 36%. Happy to get to him at this salary. Benedict Mathurin, Pascal Siakam, both like 15 to 20% owned. I'm getting 10 to 15% of both of them. They're pretty much correctly priced, but they should play plenty of minutes in a good matchup against the Bulls. The Bulls on the other side, we do have Q tags here. Zach LaVine is probable, but Josh Giddey is probable. Zach LaVine is questionable. Kobe White is Nope, had it right first time. Sorry. Zach LaVine probable. Josh Giddey probable. Lonzo Ball questionable. Kobe White questionable. Buzelis questionable. So Giddey and LaVine should be playing. Lonzo, Buzelis, and Kobe White do not know. I projected them all in for right now. If Kobe White is out, it should possibly benefit Josh Giddey's playing time, though it doesn't have to, as we've seen. If Lonzo is out and Kobe White is out, that should make Giddey project a little bit better. It makes the Sunmu project a bit better from a playing time standpoint. If Buzelis is out, it probably doesn't matter unless other guys are out too. Like with Kobe White out, we've been seeing Julian Phillips start. If Buzelis and White are out, or like Ball, Buzelis, and White are out, all the Q guys are out, then Phillips might actually play enough minutes to like sort of matter. It would make Talen Horton-Tucker look better at 4,100. He's actually a good point per minute guy. So that's probably where I would look first if these guys are out. But really just kind of in a holding pattern here because that's a lot of minutes potentially available, or a team that isn't particularly appealing at all. Jalen Smith getting the most ownership right now at 16%. I didn't get to him in this run, but I certainly understand why the field would get to him. He should play all of the minutes at center that Nikola Vucevic doesn't play. Typically, that's going to be like 14 or 15 minutes. He's a good point per minute guy. And so at 3,300, it is a pretty good point per dollar projection. The problem just becomes you are using a center spot on him. So let's say he goes and gets like 20 DraftKings points. That's still probably actually holding you back from winning tournaments, even though it is going to be, a good point per dollar play. There's just opportunity cost at the position that makes it so, you have Vooch, you have maybe Drummond if he starts. You have Goga, who's not the highest upside guy, but, could give you a good score. You have both Atlanta centers. You have Anthony Davis at center. You have Sabonis at center. So, you have Gobert at center. You have Kessler at center. Like it's just a position where there's going to be multiple guys probably that go for like 35, 40, 50 fantasy points. So if you use one of those spots on somebody that scores 20, it increases the chances that you're just like boxing yourself out of winning lineups. So that's the concern with somebody like that when they're getting ownership. I love playing guys like Jalen Smith when they're like 5% owned or something like that, because then you're just getting a huge reward if you get like the Nikola Vucevic foul trouble game where Jalen Smith plays 22 minutes and scores, 28 fantasy points. But when he's 16% owned, there's still obviously a reward if you play him and that happens, but it's a smaller reward since the ownership is higher. And then the penalty is higher because when he does, just hit his projection and not do anything for you, actively hurt you, there's just more people in that situation. So not getting too much of him right now. But again, from a point per dollar standpoint, I do think he's very obviously underpriced at 3,300. Opportunity cost and ownership is just the issue right now. Nikola Vucevic, 10% owned. I'm getting pretty close to that at 7%. I'm right around the field on Dosunmu at 7%. Probably would get to more Dosunmu if guys start getting ruled out here. Obviously, last night's game was an outlier. You cannot ever expect Ayo Dosunmu to go out there and get triple doubles, but you can expect him to go play a bunch of minutes in a good matchup at a very fair price tag. Zach LaVine, 7,700, shooting guard, small forward, high ceiling on him. I think the biggest issue is that it's difficult to project him for more than like 33 or 34 minutes. And he's in a price range where you can project other guys for like 36. So it does start to be tough to really prioritize him. But he is somebody that certainly, if you need a low-owned guy with a high ceiling in a given lineup, fits perfectly fine. Before I move on to the last three games, a reminder to sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. That is the site that I started with Uticow, Brick75, and Nerdy Tenor. Our goal over there is to make you better at DFS in a sustainable way, help you close some of the gaps that you probably have in your current game, help you get the most out of whatever your process is. We all approach DFS differently. We've all had success in different ways. So no matter how you think about it, no matter how you approach it, we probably have actionable advice that can save you time, save you money, and make you better at DFS. So sign up using the link in the description below. We will also be having our monthly roundtable coming up shortly, which is our Q&A for members, where the four of us take your questions, give our thoughts and opinions on all of them. That will be coming up shortly. We do that once a month. So head over there, check that out. Highly recommend that. Moving on to the Kings and the Spurs. Kings have a 117 team total here. Nobody really standing out here. You know, this is essentially a healthy team. You have DeRozan back. Domantas Sabonis does still look pretty good at 9,300, 12% projected ownership, showing up in 13% of my lineups. DeMar DeRozan, 11% ownership at 7,400. I'm getting the 5%. This probably has to do with Paul George. Paul George and DeMar DeRozan are projected for similar ownership. I have Paul George projected a little over a point higher than DeRozan at basically the same salary. So what you're basically seeing here is I have 18% combined, 21% combined ownership or exposure to DeRozan and George. They're projected for 19% combined ownership. So I'm basically playing them at the same rate as the field combined. But because the field's playing DeRozan at a little bit higher rate and I have George projected a little bit higher, I'm just playing George at a higher rate than DeRozan. That's basically what is happening there. They both are similar plays. They both look pretty good, though. Nothing wrong with either of them. DeMar DeRozan should give you 37 minutes or so. Wemby is doubtful for the Spurs, so that does hurt rim protection here, make things a bit better for the Kings in general, and Fox, getting to the rim. Malik Monk playing big minutes, but he is up to 7K. He is clearly a very capable scorer. He does take a backseat when he's playing with the starters. He's not typically taking shots away from Domantas Sabonis or De'Aaron Fox or DeMar DeRozan. But if he gets hot, still certainly capable of having that big game. And the big benefit in the starting lineup, of course, is that he's just playing a lot of minutes. Keegan Murray should probably play like 38 minutes in this one as well, but he is 6,100. And when you're playing alongside Monk, DeRozan, Fox, and Sabonis, your job is to pretty much stand in the corner, grab some rebounds, knock down threes when they give you the ball, and play defense. Not the most conducive role for fantasy production at $6,100, but 38 minutes is a lot if you wanted to go that route. On the other side for the Spurs, Wemby is doubtful today. We do not have Devin Vassell on the second half of a back-to-back, which does open up minutes even off of yesterday. No Trey Jones again either. No Q tags here, though, so we should have Chris Paul on the second half of the back-to-back. We should have Jeremy Sohan on the second half of the back-to-back after he played 36 minutes yesterday, which was certainly noteworthy. He had appeared somewhat limited in his first game back, where he only played like 22 minutes. But yesterday went out, played 36 minutes. I projected the same starting lineup that we had yesterday, which was Sohan starting at the 5 over Zach Collins. It was Chris Paul, Castle, Champagnie, Barnes, and Sohan. I went 33 minutes on Sohan. I'm not going to just start projecting 36 because it happened yesterday, but it certainly could happen today. And at 6,100, he looks good. The big thing really is that he has power forward eligibility now. So when he first came back, for whatever reason, DraftKings had only given him center eligibility, and he was $6,300. Now that he has started at center and played 36 minutes, naturally his price tag has come down, and he has moved to power forward. So it's correct the way they have him now, but just kind of funny the way it worked out. Either way, he's going to look really, really good after the minutes that we saw yesterday. 33% projected ownership. I am a bit higher than that. 33% ownership coming into Castle. I am a bit higher than that. He is only $4,800, and Vassell being out is a benefit for him. Typically, he's still been playing 30-plus minutes even since Vassell has come back. But any game that Vassell is in, especially with Sohan back now as well, it's just going to be riskier going to Castle because you're going to have games where those two guys just steal minutes from him. They both can obviously handle the ball in addition to Chris Paul. And so Castle just is going to have more volatile minutes when those guys are in. But you take out Devin Vassell and those minutes look a bit safer. I feel pretty comfortable projecting 32 minutes here. I think he could play more. Certainly could play like 30 also. But at this price, just looks like a really, really good value play. I love Keldon Johnson here. I think I'm a little bit higher than the field, or than the industry rather, on him as far as the way I'm projecting him. But this is somebody that, the playing time's been hit or miss, but he played 28 minutes last game. He played 24 the game before that, played 29 the game before that. That was a game where Sohan was out, but Vassell was in. 22 the game before that. So, you've seen the playing time bounce around, but you don't have Wemby now. Not that they play the same position, but it still opens up the need for scoring, and it opens up minutes in general. You don't have Vassell. I went 27 minutes on Keldon Johnson here. I just wouldn't be surprised at all if he approached 30 in this game and makes him look really, really good at $4,500. Chris Paul showing up a lot for me as well. I projected 30 minutes here. You don't have Trey Jones. Now you don't have Vassell, who in some instances was acting as his backup yesterday. $6,200 price tag looks very good to me. Only getting 10% ownership. I'm over the field on that. Josh said that he doesn't think Castle starts. He thinks Collins starts. Yeah, I'd be surprised. I mean, it's possible, but I think that they would probably take like Champagnie out of the starting lineup before they took Castle out and go with Paul, Castle, Barnes, Sohan, Collins. But yeah, I mean, it could be the case. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Collins started, but I do think Castle's starting. Obviously, if Castle doesn't start, I would be backing off of the 32 minutes there. But right now, Castle, Sohan, Keldon, Paul, all looking really, really good to me. And it seems like the only two that the field really likes are Castle and Sohan, which I don't disagree, but I don't really know why they aren't getting to Keldon and Paul. Maybe this changes. And again, if this is what I was referring to earlier, where, when we get to lock, if you're getting 20 to 30% projected ownership on Keldon and on Chris Paul, I'm still going to play them, but I'm going to play them at a lower rate. And I'm going to start mixing in more of, the Dalton Connect, guys like that. But like right now, to compare them, Dalton Connect is 4,700. He does have shooting guard eligibility, but he's 4,700. He's projected for 28% ownership. I have him projected for 25.5 DraftKings points. So I have Keldon Johnson at $200 less, projected for like half a fantasy point more at half the ownership. I am obviously just going to play Keldon Johnson a ton. So that's kind of the issue that I was running into with a lot of these earlier guys, where I think Keldon Johnson is just as good, if not better, and the field disagrees. And if that is the case, I'm going to try and exploit it. Again, I think it's likely that ownership just adjusts. But, this goes back to conversations I've had on previous shows about my strategy with DFS. My strategy isn't actually to just match the field everywhere. It's that usually the field plays pretty well, so there's not that many spots that I can point to and say, I think they're wrong. If the field's going to just act like Keldon Johnson is on average playing 24, 25 minutes today, I think they're wrong, and I'm going to play a lot of them. So really, how much Keldon I get to depends on ownership, but 4,500 is a ridiculously good salary here. Zach Collins, 5K, I got like 1%. If he starts, by all means, play him, because if he starts, that signals he's probably going to play a nice chunk of minutes. I still projected him for 24 based on the rotations we saw yesterday and based on the fact that Vassell is out. One thing I will say too, though, that maybe goes a little bit overlooked. If Collins starts, it's probably good for Charles Bassey, because it would probably signal that Bassey's going to get a little bit more at center. In games that Wemby's been out this year where Collins has started, Collins has averaged typically they've split 48 minutes. And when he's not in foul trouble, Collins plays like 26 minutes, Bassey plays 22. Now, obviously, if you're starting Sohan at the 5, you're likely to get what you saw yesterday, where Collins plays like 24, Bassey plays like 12 to 14 as like the third or 2.5 center. I don't know what that word is supposed to be, if there is one, but if Collins is starting, I'm not saying that I think you get 48 minutes combined from them necessarily, but if Collins is starting, going to something like 26 Collins, like 18 Bassey, still leaves, 4 minutes for Sohan in small ball lineups. And so I do think there's like a sneaky benefit for Charles Bassey if Zach Collins starts, in addition to it obviously being better for Collins as well. David Wayne sets a bonus will triple-double if they start Sohan at the 5. So, I mean, they started him against Vooch yesterday is the thing. Like, they clearly, 24 hours ago, did not give a shit about starting Sohan against a true center. So, the only way that they care today is if they had a change of heart after yesterday's game, which I have no idea. But, yeah, like, that was my first thought, too, when I was projecting the starting lineup today, was like, are they really going to go Sohan against Sabonis? And then it was like, well, who did they play last game? And the answer was another guy that I would not have started Sohan against. So we'll see, but definitely a lineup that we'll need to keep an eye on. Minnesota taking on Golden State in a game that has as close a spread as you can get to. Nobody is questionable for Minnesota. Rob Dillingham is still out, which, is a fringe rotation guy. We saw Josh Minot just pick up like 6 minutes or so last game. So still a pretty tight rotation here for Minnesota. I've talked about this rotation being really interesting in general lately. I'm not getting to a lot of this team. Neither is the field. 10% Julius Randle leading the way. I'm getting to about 5% at 7,300. His playing time still hasn't been great lately. Did play like 16 to 17 minutes in the first half of their blowout win last game. He still has the ability to play 34 or 35 minutes, but he has kind of trended down a little bit since the Wolves have kind of started to publicly admit that they need to figure out what's wrong with their team. Rudy Gobert playing big minutes. 6,600, I think, is a reasonable price tag. I'm surprised I don't have a little bit more just because I projected him for 37 minutes. I have typically been over the field on him lately, but maybe just has to do with how much of like the Spurs value I'm getting to right now. And I don't, I'm not getting to this price range. It might also have to do with the way I projected Utah and Portland. I haven't looked at that. It is possible I'm getting a lot of Kessler and Ayton. But either way, if you get to some Gobert, great. I've talked about it before, but his point per minute production this year is down just because his usage rate is down. But still, tons of block upside, tons of rebound upside, probably playing massive minutes again if this game is competitive. Mike Conley getting 7% ownership at 5K. I don't have any right now. I projected 26 minutes. We have seen him play north of 30 lately, but the rotations recently have just been really not favorable to him because you've seen DiVincenzo and Alexander Walker playing more, and it's come at the expense of Conley. So projecting 26 minutes here felt right. Didn't get me to him. I am 2x the field on a $4,900 Naz Reid. You are still getting 96 minutes combined in competitive games from Rudy Gobert plus Julius Randle plus Naz Reid. If you go back and look at the game against the Lakers through the first 3 quarters, there was not a single minute of that game where 2 of Naz Reid, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert were not on the floor. And so what that means is, one, the average projection, the median projection for Naz Reid is very favorable because unless we start seeing like 37, 38 minutes from Randle at the same time that Gobert is playing 37, 38 minutes, it means that Reid is in the mid-20s. The other thing is that Reid backs up both of them. So if Gobert gets in foul trouble, Naz Reid comes in the game. If Julius Randle gets in foul trouble, Naz Reid comes in the game. So there are basically 2 different ways for him to get more minutes, in addition to just playing enough minutes to look good anyway. So I am once again playing more than the field on Naz Reid. That has been the trend lately. I'm going right back to it here. And it's probably something where I could even get more of that if Keldon Johnson stops looking so good. Keldon Johnson being $400 less, the way I have him projected at 15% ownership is clearly the priority for me. But if Keldon Johnson starts to look like he's efficiently owned, and I still think Reid's going under-owned, my Naz Reid can pop up a bit here as well. So I do like Naz Reid. It's just a matter of how much I end up getting to. Anthony Edwards, the typical Anthony Edwards play, doesn't stand out as a priority. He's correctly priced. He also has a massive ceiling. And, if you want to use him as a contrarian play, go for it. Alexander Walker, DiVincenzo, both pretty fairly priced, both playing more minutes lately, as I mentioned. They're cheap. If you get to them, fine. I didn't really need them in the lineups that I built, it doesn't look like, but playing time has been nice for those guys. McDaniel's in that price range too. His playing time has trended down lately a bit. One of the recent games where he didn't play a lot was due to heavy foul trouble, but you've also just seen Alexander Walker cutting in his playing time, which I still projected him for 27 minutes compared to 25 for Alexander Walker or 23 compared to 23 for DiVincenzo. But Very comparable play to those guys. I think I view them all pretty much the same. On the Golden State side, Andrew Wiggins is questionable. Steph Curry is probable. Draymond Green is also probable. We will need to keep an eye on this starting lineup, not just because of Andrew Wiggins' status, but because it is Steve Kerr. I projected Kevon Looney to remain in the starting lineup. I don't know if that changes. I projected Podziemski to remain in the starting lineup. That could change at any time. But for now, I have Curry, Podziemski, Wiggins, Draymond, and Looney as the projected starters. Draymond coming back did knock down the minutes projection on Looney from the 24 or so that he's played, 24 and 26. He's played the last couple of games back to about the 20 that he's averaged as a starter with Draymond since the start of last year. Doesn't make him look great. Got him into a lineup here, but no real ownership coming into this team, and I don't really think that it should. Kuminga, I assume, moves back to the bench. If he doesn't, he's a good value at 5,200, but assuming he moves back to the bench, it's tough to play him. Wiggins at 6,600 has a ceiling, but there's a lot of forwards that I like at cheaper price tags today. There's not really much to see here from Golden State, I don't think. Steph is 9,700. I don't know what he is on FanDuel, but typically he's cheaper. If you get him at 8,800 or something over there, I think that's interesting. Did play 34 minutes against the Nuggets in his last game, but at 9,700, that's a higher price tag than Trae Young. It's a higher price tag than Franz Wagner. It's a higher price tag than Halliburton by a lot. It's a higher price tag, I think, than De'Aaron Fox. It's higher than Edwards on the other side of this game. It's really, really, really tough to pay that for Steph on DraftKings. And then finally wrapping things up with what should be an awful, awful basketball game, but a very good DFS game, hopefully. I kind of suspected this was going to be the case. Utah taking on Portland. This game is between two very, very bad teams. And so we have a pretty appealing DFS environment. 226 total, like a 1.5 to 2 point spread here. Walker Kessler at 6,300 looks like he is going to be my highest owned center, I believe. Haven't got to DeAndre Ayton, I guess. But Walker Kessler looks really, really, really good. He's been playing huge minutes. Even last game played through a blowout in that NBA Cup game. 36 minutes last time out, 35 the game before that. Did have a surprising 30-minute game against, I think it was Dallas on the 30th, where he just played 30 minutes in a competitive game. That still can obviously happen, but he should play a lot of minutes in this one. It does help that he has DeAndre Ayton on the other side too. Just, another natural big that's going to play a ton of minutes for Portland that you're going to want Walker Kessler on the floor to defend as long as he can avoid foul trouble. So I love Walter Kessler at this price tag. The game where he played 31 minutes was, again, a game against Denver where he just played 31 minutes, could have played more. Was kind of surprising, I guess, that he didn't. But playing time, has generally looked pretty good for him, at least in their last couple of games. So going north of 30, I went to 34, but I think you could probably make that like 33 and still be fine. Walker Kessler just projects really, really well for me here. Lauri Markkanen, I'm right around the field on him. 7K is just a really good price tag for Markkanen in a game that is likely to be competitive. You have to keep in mind that his average playing time for the season is going to skew a little bit low just because Utah's not a very good team. And they're going to be in their share of blowouts. John Collins getting 14% ownership at 7,200. I'm basically 2x the field there. I think he plays a lot of minutes in this one. You do still have a shorthanded Utah team, even though they don't have questionable players today. You are still missing Jordan Clarkson. You're still missing Filipowski and Hendricks. You have Cody Williams still in the G League. So there are still minutes here. And if you're not giving them to John Collins, it's just giving more to guys like, Potter and Sensabaugh and Juzang, who I have all projected to play between 14 and 20 minutes. But I think Collins still gets plenty of run here as well. Keontae George, secondary play at 5,900. Colin Sexton, secondary play at 6,200. I do prefer George. I think he plays a couple more minutes. He's also a little bit cheaper. Field prefers George as well. But all of the starters look good, look at least playable to me. I really like Walker Kessler. I like Markkanen. I really like John Collins at his current ownership as well. And then wrapping things up with Portland, Scoot Henderson is questionable. If he comes back, that probably shaves minutes a little bit off of like Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, certainly Delano Banton. You would expect to lose a lot of minutes. Doesn't have like a huge impact, I don't think. Probably takes minutes away from Kamara as well. With him projected in, though, I am still getting to this team. The priority for me, once again, DeAndre Ayton, 11% projected ownership at $6,800. And I really, really, really do not know why. He is playing huge minutes in competitive games. 33 minutes last time out on the 3rd, which was against the Clippers. The Blazers lost by 22 points. DeAndre Ayton subbed out with 6.5 minutes to go, still finished at 33 minutes. The game before that was on the first against the Mavericks. The Blazers did only lose by 6 in this one. Weird rotations here where Ayton did only play 32 minutes, but he basically sat for the final 8.5 minutes of the fourth quarter. You're just not going to see Ayton not close games very often. In the first half, he played 18.5 minutes, so was still tracking to play huge minutes, just had a unusual rotation. They closed small with Sharp, Kamara, Grant, Avdia, and Banton. That was against a Dallas lineup that had Kleba, Dinwiddie, PJ Washington, Grimes, and Luka. Walker Kessler is not going to play the same way that Maxi Kleba and PJ Washington play at the 5. I do not anticipate the Blazers closing small here unless this game gets really weird. So I think that was kind of a matchup thing where you look at who Dallas had on the floor, and then you go back beyond those couple of games, 41 minutes, 34 minutes, and then you get all the games that he missed. So you've been getting, big run, or at least a potential for big run from DeAndre Ayton. He's only $6,800. I'm playing a ton of him. I'm around the field on Shade on Sharp at 5,900, 15% ownership. I have 17%, just a pretty decent price tag. I did knock a couple minutes off how I would project him if Scoot is out, so he'll look better if Scoot is out. Jeremy Grant's playing big minutes too. 13% for me, 7% for the field, $5,700 price tag. Again, you go back and look at their recent games, 35 minutes in a blowout, 37 minutes in a competitive game, and then 2 games that he missed and a game that he left early over his last 5. He's averaging 33 minutes per game for the season, but this is a game where it's likely to be competitive, and I think you're getting 35 plus minutes from Jeremy Grant at $5,700. Looks really good to me. Simons looks fine at $6,600. He'll look a little bit better if Scoot is out as well. But Ayton looks like a priority. I like Jeremy Grant, especially relative to ownership. I think Shade on Sharp and Anthony Simons look fine. TDID Forever said, is it counterintuitive to play Kessler and Ayton in the same lineup? No. Generally, I do not care about playing 2 guys that are going to be on the floor together, whether they're on opposing teams, whether they're on the same team. There are obviously some instances where some guys are going to impact each other differently than others. If you have 2 teammates that are producing most of their fantasy points from scoring, they're going to be a little bit worse together than if you have a teammate that is getting a lot of assists and another teammate that is scoring a lot. When you have 2 guys here like Ayton and Kessler, the logic, if you were going to argue that you don't want them together, would be that there's only X amount of total rebounds in a game. Neither one of these guys is likely to go score 40 actual points. You're hoping you get the game where they grab 15 to 20 rebounds. They're probably not both doing that in the same game. But the counter argument to that is, one, they're both cheap relatively, to the minutes that I think they're likely to play. They're both good enough point per minute guys on average for their salaries. And also you do get positive things from the same game as well. Instead of just focusing on how many rebounds to go around there are, if this game just gets played at a higher pace than is being projected, that's good for both of them, because then it just means more rebounding opportunities. If both of these teams just shoot really poorly, it's good for both of them because it just means more rebound opportunities. If the game goes to overtime, obviously it's good for both of them. So I think it's something that people tend to view the negatives when you talk about correlation in NBA a little bit stronger, just a little bit more heavily than they view the positives from playing in the same game. So I don't have any issue whatsoever playing these guys together. This is just 150 lineup set. So there would be 50 DeAndre Ayton lineups. Of those 50 lineups, Walker Kessler is in 20% of them, in 10% or in 10 of them. So they're not showing up a ton together, but that doesn't even necessarily have to do with not wanting them in the same lineup or anything. It's just obviously once you put DeAndre Ayton in one spot, then you're less likely to have Walker Kessler in the other spot. But actually, you can check on SaberSim too. Here's my plug for their site, which they don't pay me or anything. I just think it's a great site, and this is something that I do like about it. You can actually click on the player and go in here and see correlations. So you actually do have a slightly positive correlation between Walker Kessler and DeAndre Ayton. Nothing crazy. You're certainly not setting rules saying if Walker Kessler then DeAndre Ayton, but nothing that grades out as negative between the two of them. So really like being able to look at that. So to recap, injury news we're waiting on and lineup news. We need a Sixers lineup. We also need the status of Andre Drummond. We need Jonathan Isaac status. We need LeBron James status, and we need a Lakers starting lineup. We need Andrew Nembhard's status and a Pacers lineup. We need Kobe White, Buzelis, and Ball's status for the Bulls. Obviously, a lineup there if White is out. We need a Spurs lineup just because maybe they changed it up from last night. Devin Vassell is out, though we already know that. No Q tags there. No Q tags on Minnesota. Andrew Wiggins is questionable for Golden State. Q tag on Scoot Henderson off the bench for Portland. So that wraps up this one. Thank you again for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. Jorge said Ayton suggested for single entry. I think he's perfectly fine. He's one of my favorite center plays on the slate. Would have no issue with that. I'm actually playing small field tonight more than I'm playing large field. I would assume that I have plenty of him. So that wraps this one up. Thanks again for checking out the show. Made it to 4 this week. Unfortunately, wasn't able to do yesterday, but definitely looking to be more consistent with this and build up viewership on this show. So appreciate you guys checking it out. Appreciate you hitting the thumbs up button as well if you haven't already or if you did. And other than that, have a good weekend. Good luck on your lineups tonight. I will see you back here on Monday.